I am aware of how deathly pale I look. The sunlight is just doing what it wants. I am pale, but I'm not normally this pale. I think the color is just really washing me out right now. And I have my blinds down to kind of cut the light a little bit, but it's not doing anything. Hi there, thank you so much for joining me today. My name's Natasha, welcome to my channel. This video is my March update for my eyeshadow project pan. It's not so much a project pan because I'm not trying to actively hit pan or finish anything, but my goal is to make sure that all of the eyeshadows, all of the palettes in my collection get used. So every month I choose 2 palettes or 1 palette and a set of eyeshadow singles, and I make an effort to focus on those and use those only for that month. And that way, by the end of the year, all of the eyeshadows in my collection have been used and I've been able to focus on them and put them in the spotlight even just for a little bit. So let's start with the 2 palettes that I was focusing on in February. I wanted to stick with the romantic theme. I wanted to stick with the pinks and reds. And so I chose to go with the ColourPop She's All That palette and the Sydney Grace Enduring Love palette. Let's start on the She's All That palette from ColourPop. I will show a before and after of what it looked like before I started focusing on it this month and what it looks like now. And I have used this 10 times over the past month, and I will also include the number of times I used each shade. You'll notice that the one shade Uncensored, that one in the middle, I didn't use that at all because that is a pressed glitter and I don't feel comfortable using that on my eyeballs. But all the other ones I used at least once, and I got some really great recommendations from my intro video where people said I should choose one shade from each palette and try to use it 5 times. And so my chosen eyeshadow from this palette that I randomly generated to use 5 times was Risque, which is that top shimmery corner right there. I ended up using that 7 times. I did really like it, and it was nice to know that I had like one shadow from each palette that I needed to focus on. And so if I was busy and I needed something really quick, I could just grab for that one shadow, make an easy look with it, and have it be tallied for the day. Some thoughts on this palette. I really love those deep reds, those burgundies. There is one shade in here, Wink Wink, which pulls more of a true red on my eyes. So it is nice to have it when I want, but then if I want something that's a little bit more flattering, I can go with Please Me, which is a darker burgundy. And that one still has the warmth and the red to it, but it is less likely to make me look sickly. And I did like the shimmer shades in here as well, but I will say I wish there was one shade that just was a little less chunky. The 2 shimmers in here are really pretty, but they are a little bit chunky and they're not super foiled. So if I wanted something foiled, I would reach for one of the shades from the Enduring Love palette because I think the shimmers in here are a lot nicer than the ones in here. I am really glad I got a chance to play around with this some more, and it is a really nice palette. I'm glad I own it, and it was nice to reach for these reds and pinks during February. Now let's look at Enduring Love. Again, I will have a before and after photo of the 2 palettes. This one I used more. I used this 14 times versus the She's All That palette I only used 10 times. And I loved this palette. You'll see in the numbers that there were some shades that I would reach for over and over again. Devotion being my most used shade. That is such a beautiful gold. I used it a lot. I used it quite a bit, and it is my favorite shade from the palette. I did use Passion 6 times. That was the shade that I randomly generated to use 5 times. And then another one that I used quite often was John. It's a beautiful green shimmer shade, and I did use that on the lid sometimes, but a lot of the time I would use it as an inner corner highlight because it's light enough to put there, but it also has that little bit of green, so it kind of makes it a little bit different, changes things up a little bit. I even used Boaz, which is a matte black. That's not something I typically go for ever, so I am glad that I do have a look with that, and I will show you which look I've used that in later on when I show you some looks that I created with each palette. Overall, really love this palette. I think the quality, I mean, when you're looking at the quality between these 2, the Sydney Grace one is definitely better quality. My one shade in here that I'm a little disappointed in is Deanna, which is that olive shade right there. I have mentioned, and I mentioned in my eyeshadow bingo that I did with these 2 palettes, that this definitely pulls more brown and doesn't really have as much of a reflect on the eyes. It performs more like a satin, and it has a darker base, so the green, the olive part doesn't really stand out. But other than that, I was really glad to get to play with this a little bit more. It's an underutilized palette in my collection, so is the She's All That palette. So to be able to focus on them a little bit more and get more thoughts on the formula of all the shades was really nice. Now let's look at some of my favorite looks that I created over the past month. I have 3 from the She's All That palette, 3 from the Enduring Love palette, and then 1 where I used both palettes in one look. So let's start with the She's All That palette. My first look, I really did want to dive into those pinks and reds. I even put a color on the lower lash line, which I don't use very often. I don't usually do that on the lower lash line. I used Cha Cha, a mixture of Cha Cha and Wink Wink. I used that in the crease. And then I used Please Me, which is that dark burgundy, on the outer corner. And I put all 3 of those also on the lower lash line. And then I used Risque all over the lid to brighten it up, and I really like how this turned out. Very pink, really appropriate for Valentine's Day, etc. And I like this a lot, and I am going to try to do better at telling you what I have on my lips in these looks as well. So in this one, I have a combination of NYX Nude Truffle, which is a little bit of a deeper nude brown for me, and then Charlotte Tilbury's Live It Up lipstick on top. For look number 2, I wanted to do an all matte look. So I started with Uncupped all over the lid and also on the lower lash line to really make things super bright. And that is a cream that has a little bit of a pink undertone. And then I used Come Through on the crease. And then I took the shade Silhouette, which is a really beautiful deeper red. And I used that kind of like a liner where I created a little bit of a wing. And it's an all matte look. It has a little hint of red. I think it looked really pretty, and having that uncuffed shade, that cream color, to brighten things up, and then not using a super dark crease color, I think helped it look a little bit more flattering for me because I have more deep set eyes. And then on my lips, I'm just wearing Nude Truffle from NYX. For the third look, I wanted to make it a little bit more cool toned. I felt like the other 2 looks that I created were very warm and pinky red, and for this one I wanted to have more of a cool tone undertone by using more grays, and if I did use a pink, I would use more of like a bubblegum. So I started by using Cha Cha on the crease. I will say that there aren't any like cool tone bubblegum pink mattes in here, so I started with Cha Cha, and then I put Fishnets and Risque. I mixed those together and I put that on the lid, and then I used the Feels, which is that really dark gray with shimmer in it. I used that on the outer corner. And I'm sorry, I know I used NYX Natural, the NYX Natural lip liner on my lips, but I don't remember what I put on top. It looks like I'm wearing some type of lipstick or lip balm or something, but I can't remember what it was. Now for the looks I created with the Enduring Love palette. The first look, I wanted to use that green. I wanted to use both of the greens, both Deanna and John. So I started by putting a mixture of Juliet and Darcy in the crease, and then I used Passion to deepen up the outer third. And then what I did is I used John on like the very inner corner, and then I used Deanna on the lid. And I do feel like when you pair Deanna with John, you get a little bit more of the green, but it's still not as green as it could be. And then on my lips, again, I have NYX Nude Truffle and Charlotte Tilbury's Live It Up. So for the next look, I wanted to focus on the golds and browns from the palette. So I started by doing a mixture of Cherish and Robert in the crease. And then I used Romeo, which is that lighter color. I used that on the inner corner, and then I used Devotion all over the lid. I may have put Romeo a tiny bit on top of Devotion as well to make it a little bit more pinky looking, but this was really beautiful. Every time I use Devotion, the look always just turns out really pretty. It's just one of those shades where it can make any bad look great. Not that this looked bad at the beginning. And again, I have classic combination, NYX Nude Truffle and Charlotte Tilbury Live It Up on the lips. So for this last look featuring just the Enduring Love palette, I did break into that Boaz shade, that darker matte black. And I started by putting Juliet in Robert. Juliet is kind of a mid-tone neutral brown, and then Robert is a deeper warm brown. Mixing those, putting them in the crease. Then I took Devotion, put that all over the lid, and then put Boaz on the outer corner. I didn't build it up to full opacity. I didn't want like a super stark black on the outer corner, but I did add enough that I think it added a definite depth there, and you can tell it is more of like a cool toned ashy type of shade. And then I put John on the inner corner, and on my lips I'm wearing a lip oil from Merit in the shade Sangria. I really liked this one. I think it helped me not be so afraid of matte black eyeshadows because I am able to build them or make them really sheer just to add some depth to the look without it overpowering everything. And it also wasn't very messy to work with, which was very nice. And the last look is featuring both palettes. This is the look that I created in my eyeshadow bingo video, so if you are interested in how the entire process that went into creating this look, you can definitely check it out there. This one definitely did take a while. You'll see in that video, up until the very last step, I wasn't sure. I really didn't know where I was gonna go with it. I didn't know if I would like it. The two shades from the She's All That palette that I randomly generated were Uncuffed and Wink Wink. And then from the Enduring Love palette, I randomly generated Victoria and Deanna. I used Uncuffed as a lid setting shade. I also used it as a brow bone and inner corner highlights. I put Victoria a little bit in the crease, but I really made sure that Wink Wink was the main color in the crease. I definitely built up that red so that it was very apparent in the crease. And then I put Deanna all over the lid, which is that olive brown shade. And I put those same colors on the lower lash line, and I also put a heavier liner both in the upper lash line but also on the lower lash line, and I put mascara on my under eyes as well. Those three things I don't usually put on my under eyes. I usually don't put anything on my under eyes. So that definitely created a smokier, darker look than I go for. And then it still didn't seem like it was fully together, so I put a little bit more of Deanna higher up in the crease so that it better went with the red shade, so that they better blended together. And then I went back in and I grabbed Fishnets, which is that shimmery pinky gold color, and I put that on my fingertips and I just tapped that all over the lid and a little bit up into the crease, and creating that scattered effect really helped everything come together very nicely. Definitely a grungier, heavier look than I typically go for, but I really like how this turned out. And it's only made me want to do more eyeshadow bingos with my palettes in the future. I feel like I've really gotten my use out of these two palettes. I'm ready to put them back in my collection and focus on two new ones for March. And I did want to have a little bit more of a colorful option, and I did want to have a way to incorporate more springy looks. But I also wanted to focus on the color green because during March we usually have like St. Patrick's Day, and in general I just like to wear more greens in March. And so I thought, what better time of the year to bring out the Juicy Olive palette from Give Me Glow Cosmetics. This not only has some bright greens in there, but also has some grungy greens, some olives. I'm just really excited to start dipping my brush into these shades and create some olive looks. Olive looks are like a staple for me that I don't ever wear. Like every time I wear an olive look, I'm like, yes, I feel so much like myself. This is my power color. But I just don't wear them enough. I just don't wear them enough. And this palette, I have mentioned before, it's criminally underused. I don't reach for it enough. So now is this palette's time to shine. And so I chose this palette first, and then I went into my collection to figure out what would pair nicely with this palette. What would bring this palette more versatility, and what would make it more easy for me to even just grab for one shade from this palette, have it be the main star of the show, and then go and find other shades to help create a full look with it. And I figured since this is a smaller palette in the sense that it only has 6 different shades, I should probably grab for one of my bigger palettes so I have lots of color options and formula options to choose from. And I chose the Natural Lust palette from Too Faced. This has a great mix of both mattes and shimmers. It has lots of different undertones, and also I find that this palette reminds me a lot of spring. You have some pretty warm colors, you have some nice golds, you have some cool tone and some warm tone shades. You have this pretty green here. I just think this would go really well with anything that I would want to do with this palette. I also think it would be kind of fun to use this purple shade here pinned down with one of these greens. See if I can create like a green and purple look. I don't think I've ever done a look like that, so I think that's going to be something I try to do this month. And just like I did last month, I am going to try to use every shade in these palettes at least once, which I think is going to be definitely a lot harder to do with the Too Faced Naturalist because there's 30 shades. So I'm going to have to make sure I'm reaching for multiple shades every time I create looks with these. And I really liked the idea of having one focus shadow from each palette that I was trying to use 5 times. So I'm going to do the same thing this time. I'm going to start with the Juicy Olive palette. So I have my Pretty Random app up. And again, I'm just going to have it be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the shade I am going to be trying to use 5 times is number 2, which is this really dark matte green shade here, Cocktails. And from the Natural Lust palette, I'm gonna make my maximum 30. And the same way as I did with the other palette, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you know, kind of going through the lines that way. And the shade I'm going to be trying to use is number 5, which is Come and Get It. And that is a purpley matte shade. No, wait, that's number 4. No, Come and Get It. Number 5 is actually On Fire, which is this, that's kind of like a coppery shade, I would say. That is interesting. I have mentioned in the past though that this doesn't really perform very well. Like you really have to build it up and really have to grab a lot from your brush in order to get full capacity. So maybe I'll just try to figure out a way to use it wet. Let me swatch those 2 shades. That's a very interesting pairing. Again, I will likely do an eyeshadow bingo featuring these 2 palettes sometime during the month, and I will be making sure I take pictures of my favorite looks that I create with both of them. Of course, this project is still very new to me, so if you have any ideas on how to make this project more fun or more interesting to watch, I'm definitely open to suggestions. I really like the idea of trying to use every shade at least once and picking a shade from each palette to use at least 5 times. Those were both recommendations from the people watching, and I really appreciate that. I think that adds a really fun spin to the project, especially the one where I try to use every shade at least once, because that'll mean by the end of the year, every eyeshadow in my collection has been used at least 1 time, which is probably the first time something like that will have ever happened. Anyway, that is everything I have for today's video. I really appreciate you tuning in to follow my progress, but in the meantime, that's everything I have. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.